Above the outer rim, there was no warning. The sensor grid at the Tattoo System monitoring station was built to catch hyperspace exits, weapons discharges, and unauthorized vessel approach vectors. It had been doing exactly that for 11 years, without flagging anything its operators considered worth losing sleep over. At 0311 local time, it registered an event it had no category for. 11 seconds of spectral light in the upper atmosphere, the emission profile matching nothing in the Imperial database, spatial coordinates placing the phenomenon 200 kilometers above the desert surface of Tatooine. The automated system generated a report and transmitted it to the regional garrison. The duty officer who received it noted it as likely weather interference, filed it under low priority review, and returned to the paperwork he had been writing when it arrived. Far below the station, at the altitude where the atmosphere thinned to nearly nothing, and the twin suns of the Tattoo System were already climbing above the desert horizon in their doubled arc, a man was falling. He had no memory of the crossing. One moment there had been another universe, the familiar one, with its particular sky and the yellow light of a sun he had known his entire adult life. Then something vast and silent had opened and taken him, and sealed itself behind him like water closing over a dropped stone. And the next thing he registered was gravity and heat and the unfamiliar smell of a desert world he had never seen. The smell reached him first. Dry rock, blaster coolant, organic compounds he could not classify, and underneath all of it, the mineral sharpness of moisture farming equipment running hard against the heat. His cells confirmed what the smell was already suggesting. The two stars blazing above him, Tattoo-I and Tattoo-I, G-type, both, burning in the same spectral band as the sun above Metropolis, were doing to his Kryptonian biology exactly what yellow suns had always done. The reserves that had emptied at the moment of the breach refilled. The outputs came back online, one at a time, like a system recovering from a power failure. Strength, speed, heat vision, the deep precision of his hearing, and finally, the baseline certainty that sits underneath all of them, the particular knowledge that the world is in some manageable proportion to what he is. He stopped falling at 400 meters above the desert floor. Superhearing swept outward first. He filtered the rush of wind and found beneath it the sounds of the settlement 2 kilometers ahead, repulsor engines at high altitude, multiple overlapping languages, one of them composed almost entirely of consonants and low clicks. Blaster fire, twice, to the south, and then the kind of silence that follows when no one fires back. He catalogued each thing without drama, automatically, the way his senses had never once in his adult life agreed to be quiet. Telescopic vision followed. He looked across the desert to the settlement and found 3 people on their knees in the road. 6 white-armored figures around them, 2 more positioned on a rooftop with a clear line of sight on the road below. He did not need further context. The posture of the people kneeling was the same in any species, in any galaxy. The posture of individuals who have learned, at some cost, what happens if they try to stand without permission. The double-wedge silhouette of a star destroyer crossed the northern horizon at high altitude, gray and immense against the morning sky, moving with the slow, absolute certainty of something that had never been forced to consider a world telling it no. He held the whole picture for 2 seconds. Then he flew toward the checkpoint. Before we get into this real quick, which character do you want to see go absolutely feral in a world that has no business surviving them? Drop the name in the comments. All right, let's go. The garrison at Anchorhead received the anomaly report at 0319. The senior duty officer, noting that the spectral data matched no atmospheric phenomenon in the Imperial catalog, escalated to the garrison commander. The garrison commander ordered a standard TIE response. 2 fighters. Intercept and assess. The fighters found the contact at the checkpoint on the South Road. He was standing between the stormtroopers and the place where the family had been kneeling. He had not asked the troopers to move. He had moved the nearest 2 by their pauldrons carefully, the way you set furniture aside when it is blocking something you need to reach, and placed them out of the road. The family was running. He had watched them go. A child had looked back once, over a parent's shoulder, at the figure standing in the road, with blaster bolts still cooling in the sand around his boots, and he had given the child a nod, the specific kind that means "I will stay here," which is a gesture that crosses most languages. The 4 remaining troopers had their weapons raised and were holding very still because they had fired at the contact and watched the bolts reflect off his chest and scatter into the sand, and no section of their training manual addressed what you did after that. The lead TI pilot descended to intercept altitude and opened a channel. Unidentified ground contact. State your designation and your authority. The figure in the road looked up at the 2 fighters with the calm of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous thing in any given sky. "I'm passing through," he said. "Your people had a family in that road. I moved them along. That's all there is to it." "Stand down and submit for processing," the pilot replied. He rose straight up into the airspace between the 2 fighters, slowly, without hurry. "No," he said. The co-pilot in the trailing fighter was running the sensor array. The velocity data from the monitoring station's log was still on her display. The contact had entered the atmosphere at a speed inconsistent with survival without a vessel, and was now hovering between 2 active TIE fighters, close enough that she could see his face through the cockpit glass. The expression she saw was attentive, not threatening, not afraid. The expression of someone who has already calculated the relevant variables and is not particularly troubled by what that calculation produced. She opened the garrison channel, her voice level. "Command, the contact is between us. It deflected direct blaster fire. This is not an assessment. Our unit is equipped to complete." He rose higher into the unobstructed light of both suns and looked out across the desert from altitude. The duty officer in the garrison who received the co-pilot's escalation read it once. Then he read the spectral data from the monitoring station, which had been sitting in the low priority queue since 0314. He sat with both documents for 43 seconds, which was longer than he usually sat with anything. Then he called the regional commander. The regional commander called Imperial Center. 17 hours later, by the time the matter reached the appropriate desk on Coruscant, the report had accumulated 14 supplementary attachments, sensor logs, reflection data, 2 pilot accounts, and a handwritten field note from the co-pilot that read in its entirety, "The object was not afraid of us." Above the desert, climbing into the full light of both suns, the man from the breach took stock of his situation with the patience of someone who understood large problems. He had seen worlds that looked like this one, with their boots on the neck and their paperwork in order, and he knew from long experience that they were not invincible and they were not permanent, and the only thing that made them look like both was that no one had shown them otherwise yet. He had no army at his back, he had no ship, no weapon, no flag above him. He had nowhere in particular to be and nothing in particular to lose, which was the precise condition under which he had always been most useful. Below him, a family that had been on their knees in the road was no longer on their knees. That was a start. It was the only kind of start he needed. Aboard the Imperial Star Destroyer Devastator, in high orbit above the Outer Rim, Darth Vader meditated. The chamber was designed for this. Sealed, pressurized to his suit's parameters, lit only by the faint blue wash of ambient instrumentation. In the chamber, he could set aside the constant machinery of command, the fleet reports, the officer briefings, the particular exhaustion that came from managing an empire, rather than simply serving it, and reach instead into the Force. He did this daily. It was not prayer, it was something older than prayer and more honest about what it was asking. He reached. The Force spread outward the way it always did, vast and living, binding the galaxy together at frequencies no instrument could measure. He felt the crew of the Devastator around him, 400 presences with their 400 small interior lives. He felt the desert planet below. He extended further, and then he touched it. Not a living being with a signature he could read, a shape, the particular shape that an absence makes, the outline of something the Force surrounded on all sides but could not enter. He pressed his awareness against it the way you press a hand against glass painted black from the other side, and felt nothing, not darkness, not the cold vacancy of the void. Just nothing that the Force could reach, a hole in the living web, and inside the hole something that moved with purpose. His eyes opened. The mechanical sound of his breathing filled the chamber. "What are you?" he said. Not a question, a notation. He returned to the fleet reports. The patrol's preliminary transmission reached him within the hour. The field unit dispatched to investigate the atmospheric anomaly, 11 seconds of spectral light with no vessel signature, had found a man standing in the desert outside Anchorhead. The man had not been hostile. When the patrol opened fire, the man had remained standing with his hands at his sides until the patrol stopped. Vader read the keyline twice. Concentrated blaster fire had produced, per the sergeant's own assessment, 0 physical effect. He issued orders without raising his voice. Ground assets to the Tatooine garrison. Full sensor teams. No engagement without his direct authorization. He specified this last point clearly because the man under his command had a tendency, when the standard amount of firepower proved insufficient, to simply deploy more, and he was not prepared to lose another unit to the same result. The senior fleet officer asked whether additional Star Destroyers should be redirected. "Not yet," Vader said. "Observe and contain below." The visitor was learning. He moved at a pace that read, from the sensor grid above, as a fast-walking humanoid, too deliberate for flight, too quick for a man with no destination. He covered ground without effort. His hearing extended outward as he walked, building a map from sound. The deep cyclic hum of moisture vaporators, the clipped cadence of a garrison checkpoint on the Western Road, 4 languages operating simultaneously in the settlement ahead. He found the market by the smell. Grilled protein and oil and something sweet he had no name for, and the underlayer of blaster lubricant that coated everything in this part of the galaxy. He watched the storekeepers and the customers and the way the whole operation went rigid when a stormtrooper patrol came through. Papers requested, a merchant's inventory. Assessed. A fine levied for a permit the merchant had not known was required. He had seen the architecture of this kind of system before, compliance manufactured through documentation and the constant quiet weight of force. He knew what it produced in people over time. He was looking at the product now, in every face that tracked the patrol from a distance and called it an ordinary morning. He did not act yet. The child was 8, maybe 9, holding very still in the way children learn when stillness is the safest option. The stormtrooper who stopped her was running document compliance protocols. She did not have the required documentation because she was 8 years old. The exchange had been escalating for 90 seconds when his hand came down over the trooper's forearm. Not hard, not a threat. The hand of someone indicating that the current situation was going to stop. The trooper turned. Through the helmet's external speaker came the voice of a man doing a very fast, private reassessment of what he was looking at. He met the visor and held it 3 seconds. The trooper withdrew. His partner, arriving with one hand moving toward his weapon, read his partner's posture and did not complete the motion. They left. The child was looking up at him. A woman pushed through the crowd, gathered the girl, and assessed him in 1 second flat. He kept his hands visible. He stepped back. "What are you?" the woman said, not asking, measuring. He understood the question. He had been building context on the language for hours, and the sentence was within his working range. He considered the answer that was most true, in the least space. "Someone who helps," he said. She held his gaze for 1 more second. Then she took her daughter and went. It came through the ionosphere at 1742 local time, a tight beam comm signal, encrypted, bouncing off the upper atmosphere in a pattern designed to look like natural interference to any standard Imperial intercept array. He pulled the signal from the static the way other minds pull, meaning from text, following the pattern through the noise until the voice resolved clearly, unhurried. Certain rebellions are built on hope. He did not know yet, in this galaxy's specific usage, what a rebellion was. He had the word from context, from murmurs in the market and the body language at the checkpoint and the direction in which everyone made a point of not looking. He was assembling the picture, but hope he knew. He had heard it in exactly that register in 100 places, spoken by people who needed to say it aloud, because not saying it had become unbearable. He knew what it meant when someone needed to say it out loud. He filed the signal's origin coordinates. The field report reached Vader at 1809. He read it the way he read anything in a genuinely new category, with full attention and no visible reaction. The entity had intercepted a trooper compliance action in the Anchorhead Market District, without injury to either trooper. Without weapons, without any mechanism the reporting trooper could identify. The trooper's account contained 1 sentence Vader read 3 times. The entity had placed its hand on his arm, and he had understood, without anything being spoken, that the situation was over. Vader set the report down. He reached into the Force. The hole was still there, moving east toward the outer edge of the settled zone at a pace consistent with a fast-walking humanoid. Whatever sat inside that absence had a direction. He had not met a threat he could not read in the Force. The Force was the instrument through which he understood the world. Without it, he was left with sensor data and after-action reports from men who had used the phrase zero effect and genuinely meant it. This was not a category he had encountered before. The officer at the chamber door was a lieutenant who had learned, across 4 years of service, exactly when to speak and when to remain at attention. He was remaining at attention. "Bring me everything," Vader said. "The phenomenon, the entity, all of it. Yes, my lord." The door closed. The mechanical breathing filled the room. Outside the viewport, the twin suns of the Tattoo system had finished their descent below the desert horizon. The amber light was gone. The desert below was dark. In the Force, the hole moved east. The settlement had not done anything wrong. That was the operating logic of Imperial suppression operations, the premise underneath the paperwork that no one stated aloud, because stating it aloud would require acknowledging it. The target did not need to have done anything. It needed to have been identified. The community at the edge of the desert lowlands had been identified as a rebel sympathizer population, on the basis of 3 unlicensed comm transmissions and a moisture farmer who had sold water to an unregistered transport. The assessment had been reviewed by a regional garrison commander, routed through an imperial administrative office, and returned with an authorization stamp. 38 names on a detention manifest and 4 AT-AT walkers to make the morning educational. The 4 AT-AT walkers crested the valley ridge before sunrise and spread into a line as they descended, making the kind of argument that requires no words. Each one weighed enough that the ground shook 200 meters ahead of it. Each one's laser cannons were designed for vehicle and fortification elimination. The settlement did not have vehicles or fortifications. It had 38 names on a detention manifest, and the particular silence of people who have learned over time exactly how much the Empire's promises are worth. The sonic cannons opened up first, not destructive, disorienting. The streets emptied immediately, people running for interior walls, pressing children flat, covering ears with both hands. And a company of stormtroopers moved in behind the walkers with blasters leveled and detention orders already printed, 38 names, and the authority to add to the list at field discretion. He had been watching from a kilometer above since the walkers appeared on the ridge. He came in fast and low, dropping the last 200 meters in under a second, and caught the lead AT-AT's forward leg at the full extension of its stride. The walker weighed several thousand tons. He redirected it, a precise lateral shift, left hand on the ankle joint, right hand on the strut above it, the whole force of his body in one controlled pivot that turned the machine's fall away from the southern quarter of the settlement and toward the open ground north of the perimeter wall. It came down on its side in the space of 3 seconds, hull intact, the impact shaking the earth for half a kilometer. Dust rose in a column that was visible from the ridge. The operators inside had been attempting to depress the walker's chin guns toward him. The guns were still trying to track when the machine settled. The operators were rattled and alive. That was exactly the intent. The remaining 3 walkers opened fire simultaneously. He moved through the cannon blasts the way he moved through most things, directly, without deviation, trusting the math of what he was and the math of what they were to reach the conclusion they always reached. The bolts were designed to stop a rebel vehicle. He was not a rebel vehicle. Ground-level blaster fire joined the cannon output as 2 stormtrooper companies engaged at maximum rate. The combined discharge of 3 AT-AT walkers and several hundred blasters was a significant amount of energy. In a small area, it was not enough. It was not close to enough. He kept working. The TIE fighters arrived at speed, 3 of them in a wedge, laser cannons cycling for a strafing run at the settlement's center district. He placed himself in the flight path of the lead fighter before the run began. The opening burst took him in the chest. He felt the impact the way he felt most directed energy weapons, as force rather than damage, pressure rather than penetration. His Kryptonian cells processing the output the way they processed solar radiation, converting it rather than bearing it. But T-laser cannons were not blaster pistols. The burst was enough to move him. He took 2 steps backward in midair and held, and the stagger was visible to everyone watching, the people on the ground and the pilots, in the other 2 fighters and the rebel cell on the ridge above, who had by then all reached the same conclusion at different speeds. TIE cannons were not past it. He righted himself. He reached out, caught the lead fighter's wing as it banked to make another pass, and flew it to a controlled landing in the open sand outside the settlement's western wall. He set it down without spinning it, and checked through the hull that the cockpit seal had held. The pilot inside was alive and disoriented. The other 2 fighters broke off. He went back for the walkers. The garrison commander had called for backup before the first machine went down. 3 additional walkers and a full company of additional troops. They arrived as he was grounding the second AT-AT, crossing the ridge in tight formation, and they opened fire collectively the moment he was in range. 36 laser cannons and a company of heavy infantry arriving with full confidence that this time the math would work differently. He grounded the second walker, he grounded the third. The fourth took 3 minutes longer than the others, because he took the time to steer its fall around a building on the settlement's edge that had people still inside. When the dust settled, 7 AT-AT walkers were on their sides in the sand around the settlement. Their crews were alive. Every stormtrooper who had been in his path had been moved by hand to a location where the falling walkers could not reach them. No building in the settlement had been struck by a falling machine. He walked the settlement after. Civilians first, then the walker crews. One cockpit had pressure sealed on impact, and he read the internal atmosphere through the hull until the crew managed the emergency release themselves. The garrison sergeant who filed the after-action report attempted to describe this sequence of events accurately and in the correct official format. He wrote in the weapon effectiveness field, "Conventional weapons are not applicable." The Imperial Records Office returned the form as improperly filed on the grounds that the field category did not exist. The sergeant resubmitted with the designation unknown in every combat results column. The form. It was immediately flagged for review by a senior officer who forwarded it without comment to the desk of Darth Vader. On the ridge above the valley, the rebel cell had arrived before dawn. Their mission had been extraction. A contact pinned down by the suppression operation, 2 hours of waiting for the right gap in the patrol cycle. Standard procedure. When the walkers came over the ridge, the cell leader raised her fist hold and held the position, because you do not move a cell into the middle of an Imperial suppression action if there is any alternative. Then the first walker went down. Her sensor operator read the instruments for 15 seconds before speaking. No force signature, nothing on any band. Power output readings hit the top of the scale. He stopped. The instruments gave up. They stopped recording. She kept her eyes on the settlement below. She watched the figure in the red cape check on the people in the south quarter. She watched him go back to the first crashed cockpit and verify the crew was breathing. She watched him steer a walker away from a building when he could have simply dropped it anywhere. 7 walkers. No weapons, no casualties on either side that she could observe. She lowered her fist and keyed the comm. Secure channel to command. Highest priority we have. The encrypted transmission left the ridge at 0917 and reached the command relay 4 hours later. It carried the cell's sensor data, their visual recordings, and the cell leader's written assessment, which covered the sensor readings, the weapon effectiveness observations, and the tactical implications in detail. At the bottom, below the technical data, she had added 1 sentence as a separate notation. He checked on the pilots. He grounded. He wanted to make sure they survived. Princess Leia read the sensor data and the tactical assessment first, because she was the kind of leader who read the evidence before she read the conclusion. When she reached the notation at the bottom, she read it twice. She set the report down and looked at the star map on the wall for a long moment. Then she said, to no one in particular, "Find him." The after-action report reached Vader at 11:03. Walkers, 1 grounded T, 0 casualties on the Imperial side. He read the whole document without expression. He did not order additional assets to the location. He did not request an orbital bombardment assessment. He closed the report and issued 1 instruction to the Devastator's fleet command. He would handle this himself. The graveyard was patient. 7 AT-AT T walkers lay on their sides in the sand. One was half buried at the hip where the sand had shifted during the fall. One had its chin guns still angled toward a position no longer occupied. The ground between them showed the craters, not blast radius, not explosive dispersal, not the specific devastation pattern of any ordnance in the Imperial arsenal. Impact craters. The kind made by something moving very fast and stopping very deliberately. The depth of them said the object had been carrying considerable mass at high velocity. The shape of them said it had chosen its landings. Lord Vader stepped off the shuttle ramp without waiting for it to fully extend and walked into the field at a pace that read to the officers behind him as controlled and not particularly hurried. They knew better than to mistake this for calm. He moved between the fallen machines without touching them. No explosives, no lightsaber scoring on the armor plating. No burn patterns from any directed energy weapon in the Imperial catalog. The standard explanation was a rebel armored strike or a Jedi, and this was neither. The rebellion did not have ordnance capable of it. There were no living Jedi capable of grounding 7 walkers while simultaneously doing the other thing the report described. He reached the deepest crater and crouched, one gloved hand flat against the sand, reading the geometry of it. Something moving at the speed the sensor logs described had landed here with the intent of redirecting a walker's fall, not stopping it, redirecting it. The precision implied by the crater's position relative to the building 30 meters east was not luck. It was attention paid. Something had looked at the building, calculated the fall line, and chosen a specific landing point. The report said, 0 Imperial casualties. He had read this sentence 3 times before boarding the shuttle, and he was reading it again now in the physical language of the field, and it continued to be the most interesting sentence in any document he had received this year. He extended into the Force. The hole was 30 meters above him and slightly south, at an altitude that would be invisible to anyone not specifically looking. Lord Vader did not look up. He tracked the absence the way you track a dark shape in dark water, by what it displaced rather than by what it showed. It was there, it was enormous, for a thing with no Force signature. And it was not moving. He had been watching back since the shuttle cleared the landing zone. The visitor descended. He came down from his altitude without hurry, not the fast drop of someone trying to establish ground advantage, not the movement of something flushed from cover. He descended with the deliberate quality of someone who had decided that the armored figure standing in the AT-AT graveyard was information worth having, and who understood, after several days in this galaxy, that the armored figure was the ranking presence in any room it entered. He touched down 50 meters away. The sand settled around his boots without drama. The twin suns were high and direct, and lit both of them without shadow. The crimson blade had not been lit. "You're the one they sent," the visitor said. Not a question. He had seen enough of the rebel data by now to know the silhouette, the suit, the particular quality of stillness that Lord Vader carried like a weather system. "I am the one who came." A small, precise distinction returned without inflection. The desert held the silence without difficulty. Vader raised his hand. The telekinetic grip closed around the visitor's throat. Not a technique dependent on the target's biology, not a manipulation of any nervous system. A physical grip applied through the Force to physical matter. The visitor felt it. He did not step back. He let it run, registering the sensation with the patience of a mind that had learned the first evaluation needed to be accurate rather than fast. He flexed. Not a performance of effort. His Kryptonian musculature asserted itself against the force pressure incrementally. The grip held for a breath, then another. 2 seconds. At the end of those 2 seconds, the grip broke. Vader's hand dropped. He tilted his head by a fraction that would have been invisible to anyone not watching specifically for it. The crimson blade ignited. He moved ahead of the moment rather than inside it, anticipating the visitor's position by the fraction of a second that was all a lightsaber in expert hands required. The force flowed through him even where it flowed around the gap at the center of his attention, and the edges of that gap were enough. Plasma at combat temperature crossed 3 meters in the space between instants and made contact at the left shoulder. Not a deep cut. The Kryptonian cells that had been processing 2 G-class suns since the breach resisted the plasma at this contact duration and this pressure, and the blade did not penetrate, but it scored. A line across the shoulder, not a wound, a mark. The first physical mark anything in this galaxy had put on him. He stopped. He looked at his shoulder. Then he looked at Lord Vader. The Dark Lord saw him look at it. He registered the expression and filed it. The creature was not frightened. It was not angry. It was looking at a new data point with the expression of someone running a recalculation, the same expression it had presumably worn when TIE cannon fire pushed it 2 steps back in midair, and it held and catalogued that too. Recalibration, curiosity, neither of these were reactions Vader had catalogued on an opponent in some time. The visitor closed a distance between them, not in a charge. He covered the 50 meters at a speed that Vader's precognition tracked as a blur rather than a figure present, and then already there, and took the mechanical right arm, the saber arm, in both hands and held it. Not talking. Not breaking, holding it with a grip that the suit's internal feedback reported as absolute. He did not apply that pressure. "I'm not your enemy," the visitor said. "Level, not conciliatory, not asking for anything." The voice of someone stating a calibration. "I don't know what I am in your world, but I know you're afraid of something, and I know it isn't me." The desert was very quiet. The Force told him what it could about this, which was less than it told him about anything else he had encountered in 3 decades of warfare. There was no psychology to leverage, no attachment the dark side could pressure, no fear waiting for the correct application of pain. The suit's internal systems had logged contact readings it had never recorded before. There was nothing here to kill. He did not respond to what the visitor had said. He did not respond to a number of things that registered. The visitor released the arm and stepped back 2 paces, returning to the same 50 meters, hands open at his sides. Lord Vader deactivated the saber. He returned it to his belt, without haste. He looked at the visitor for 3 seconds, a duration that in the context of this exchange was not brief, and then turned and walked back to the shuttle at the same controlled pace he had used. Walking out, the ramp rose behind him. The holographic transmission opened from Vader's private chamber aboard the Devastator. The Emperor materialized in blue light, patient and still, robes arranged in their familiar architectural calm. "There is something in the outer rim, my master," Vader said. "The Force does not know it. Its physical power exceeds any measurement I have made. It withstood my grip and did not retaliate. It does not fight to dominate." A pause that carried the weight of a man organizing information he has not had to organize before. "I do not yet know what it fights for." The Emperor was quiet for a moment, in the way he was quiet when something had genuinely engaged him, which was the most dangerous kind of quiet he produced. "Every being has a weakness, Lord Vader," he said. "Find it." The transmission closed. In the empty chamber, Vader stood with the silence the transmission had left behind. He had encountered a being the Force could not find, that his weapons could mark but not stop, that it held his sword arm and declined to break it, and had told him, without any inflection of threat, that it knew what he was afraid of, and that he was not the source. He had not confirmed or denied this. He did not respond to a number of things that registered. He would find the weakness. The Emperor was not often wrong about the existence of one. He reached into the Force. The whole was moving east again over the desert, patient and indifferent to being watched. Back toward the settlement it had apparently decided to protect. That, at least, was something to work with. He recognized the gesture immediately. The freighter came in low and slow over the desert, the kind of approach that announced itself rather than concealed itself, landing lights on ramp, descending before it touched ground. A vessel carrying people who had weighed the tactical options available to them and understood, with a clarity that spoke well of their assessment, that none of those options applied here. He had stayed in the desert since the shuttle carried Lord Vader back into the upper atmosphere. He stayed because this was what he did when a situation was unresolved. He waited for the next relevant thing to arrive. The freighter landed 40 meters away, and 6 people came down the ramp. They were armed. Every one of them carried a blaster at the hip, in the manner of people who had learned that arriving unarmed was simply arriving dead slower. But the weapons were holstered, safety locked, visible. They were carrying them the way you carry something you have decided not to use, which is a different posture from how you carry something you intend to. The woman at the front moved with the specific authority of someone who did not need height or volume to establish a room. Dark hair, direct eyes, the face of someone who had been making hard decisions since before she was old enough to have been making them. She looked at him the way she had presumably looked at everyone the rebellion needed to make up its mind about, with full attention and no visible inclination toward being impressed. She asked him 4 questions, and she asked them in the order that revealed how she thought. Who are you? Where are you from? What do you want? Why did you protect those people? He answered without deflection and in the same order. His name, he gave her the true one, not an alias, because there was no version of this conversation that improved through opacity. Where he was from, another universe. He said this plainly, aware it sounded absurd, and without any attempt to soften it. He did not know how he had arrived. He did not know if the crossing could be reversed. Both were facts, and he treated them as such. What he wanted. Nothing she was able to give him. He was not here for an alliance, or a command, or a flag to stand under. He was here because he had landed in a galaxy under military occupation and found that some things were the same, regardless of the universe you were standing in, and the people in the road, because they were in the road. She watched him through all of it. She was the kind of listener who watched your face more than she tracked your words, because the face was harder to manage. He let her watch. He did not manage his face. Show him, she said. One of the others brought up a holographic projector. The image resolved slowly on the aging equipment, and the planet that appeared was beautiful before it was gone, a blue-green world in the projection's small light, the curve of it visible for a fraction of a second before the beam hit, and the sphere became light and then became nothing, and then became an expanding cloud of debris that was all that remained. She stood very still while the hologram played. She had seen this before. He understood, looking at her face, that she had seen it many times before and intended to keep seeing it, because looking away would be a concession she had decided not to make. He watched the planet die in the small blue light of the projector. He had no name for the people who had lived there. He knew nothing of the planet's history or its cities or what the people on its streets had been doing in the moment before the beam struck. He felt the loss anyway, fully and without armor. The specific grief that comes from understanding that a thing existed, and then did not, and that the removal was deliberate. He did not hide this response. It was not something he would have hidden even if he had tried. She saw it. She held out her hand. "Princess Leia Organa," she said, "and we need to talk about what happens next." On the other side of the base, in the cramped quarters of the back section, Luke Skywalker stopped in the middle of cleaning a component from his X-Wing's targeting system. He held very still. He had been using the Force long enough to know the difference between its normal movement and an absence of movement. In a place where there should have been some, this was the second kind, a stillness in the current. A shape in the flow defined by the space around it, rather than by anything inside it. He could not find its edges in any direction the Force usually gave him. The air in the room changed. Obi-Wan's Force ghost appeared in the corner with the quality of something that had been present for a moment before the light caught it. He looked the way he always looked, patient, clear-eyed, carrying the particular calm of a man who had made all the hard choices and arrived somewhere beyond regret. "Something has arrived in this galaxy, Luke." Thoughtful, which was a different thing. The Force surrounds it. The Force does not speak to it. It is not of this galaxy's making. "Is it a Jedi?" Luke asked. Obi-Wan considered this with the care of a man who had learned that the wrong answer to a question was almost always the fast one. "No," he said. "Something older, perhaps, or something entirely new. I have not decided which." "Keep your eyes on it, Luke, and keep your mind open to the possibility that the categories we use have limits we have not yet found." The ghost faded. The room returned to its ordinary sound. Luke looked at his hands for a moment, then went back to the targeting system. The still place in the Force remained where it had been. The senior advisors took 12 minutes to reach a decision. The argument against came first, from a man who had survived 3 major rebel engagements by being meticulous about logistics and suspicious of variables he could not quantify. An entity of unknown origin and unmeasured power was a liability in any tactical situation. Leia listened to this with the patience she extended to arguments she intended to reject. Then she spoke. "We have been fighting the most powerful military force in the galaxy, with fighters and freighters, and, in significant part, luck. The Emperor has held this galaxy through fear for 20 years. She looked at the sensor data from the AT-AT engagement one more time. 7 walkers. 0 casualties on either side. Cockpit seals verified before he left the field. We are not turning away the only being in this galaxy. The Emperor cannot threaten because we're worried about what we cannot control." She set the report down. "Welcome to the rebellion." The meeting ended. He walked the base afterward, and he did not do this quickly. The corridors were narrow and lit by fixtures that prioritized function and had probably been salvaged from 3 different vessels. The people moving through them were tired in the specific way of people who have been tired a long time, and have built a working relationship with that tiredness rather than waiting for it to end. Mechanics working past their shift, pilots running simulations in the small hours, because the mission parameters had changed and the alternative was not running them. He recognized the quality of what these people were doing. He had seen it on Earth, in the places where there was nothing left but each other, in the faces of people who had weighed the cost with full information and stood up anyway, not because they were certain they would win, but because the cost of not standing was something they had found they could not pay. This was not desperation. Desperation was a different shape, inward-facing, clenched. This was open. This was people who had decided that something outside themselves was worth more than what they were spending on it, and who had kept deciding that, in these cramped corridors under bad lighting, against odds they understood better than anyone. He had known powerful beings. He had known beings capable of rewriting continents without raising their voices. Not many of them had known what this was. He found an empty corridor near the base's outer wall and stood in it for a while, listening to the sounds the base made at this hour. The mechanical hum of life support. A pilot's voice down the hall running call and response drills with another pilot, learning the distance between where they were and where they needed to be and trying to close it before the next mission came through. Somewhere in the galaxy, Lord Vader was looking for a weakness. He stood in the hallway and thought about the people on either side of him in these walls, and what they were made of, and what that meant for Lord Vader's search. He was fairly certain Lord Vader was not going to find what he was looking for. Luke Skywalker was younger than Superman had expected, and carrying something heavier than someone his age should have had to carry yet. He found the visitor near the base's eastern wall in the late afternoon, sitting on a shipping crate and doing what he had apparently been doing all day, paying attention. Not meditating, not waiting. Actually attending to the place he was in, the way people attend when they have decided the world in front of them is worth understanding before they act in it. His hand rested near the lightsaber hilt at his side, not gripping it, just near it. An unconscious habit, the gesture of something both chosen and inherited, carried so naturally he had probably stopped noticing he did it. Luke introduced himself. The visitor made room on the crate, and they sat in the particular quiet of two people who have both had large days and are prepared to take the next conversation at whatever pace it required. Luke explained the Force. He did this sincerely, without condescension, the way he had learned it from two people who had spent their lives studying it and explained it differently, and he tried to hold the middle of their explanations, the part that was true in both. The energy that connected everything, the living force and the cosmic force. The light and the dark, and the practice of choosing between them across a lifetime, and the cost of choosing wrong, and what that cost looked like for everyone near you. The visitor listened without interrupting. He had the listening quality of someone who had spent time with people who knew things he didn't, and had learned to distinguish that situation from the one where the other person was talking, but not saying much. And he was receiving the information, visibly, with the kind of full attention that made Luke feel like someone was actually hearing him. When he finished, the visitor asked one question. And what does it ask of you in return? Luke sat with this. It was not a question he had been asked before in those terms. To let go, he said, finally. The things you love, the people you're afraid of losing. You hold them, but you can't grip them. You have to trust that the Force holds what you release. The visitor nodded. He was filing it. Then Luke said the harder thing. He said it carefully, the way you say something that is true and also painful to put into words, because words that name a thing make it real in a different way than simply knowing it. The Jedi teach that attachment leads to the dark side, that love, if it curdles into fear of loss, destroys everything it touches. There was a Jedi once, one of the greatest. His love for someone was the crack in him. Sidious found it and pried it open, and what came through that crack cost more than I can describe to you in one conversation. He did not say the name. He didn't need to. The visitor was quiet for a moment. His expression was not unsympathetic. It was attentive and careful and working out something. When he spoke, he asked, "Does your love for the people in this base make you weaker, or does it give you a reason to be here?" Luke did not have an immediate answer. He had understood the attachment doctrine. He had believed in it, or tried to believe in it. in the way you try to hold a principle that asks something genuinely costly of you. But he had not heard it put against this question before, and the question did not feel like an argument so much as a reorientation, the kind that takes a thing you thought you understood and makes you see its edges for the first time. He was still working it out when the air changed. Obi-Wan appeared near the wall. He was looking at the visitor the way a scholar looks at a document in a language he has spent his life studying and finds one word he cannot place. Not troubled, exactly, deeply attentive in the way that precedes a conclusion you are not certain you want to reach. His strength comes from attachment, Obi-Wan said. He was not speaking to Luke or to the visitor. He was speaking the conclusion of a calculation aloud, the way people speak when they need the words outside their heads to check against from love of every life. By our doctrine, that is the crack through which the dark enters a pause, the kind with weight in it, and yet the crack has not opened. He disappeared. The room returned to its ordinary dimensions. The visitor turned back to Luke. He was not defensive. He was not trying to win. He spoke the way a person speaks when they are stating something they have lived rather than reasoned through at a distance. I lost my entire world. I lost Krypton before I ever had a chance to know it. I carry that. I always will. He held Luke's gaze. And I still got up. And I still tried. He fell because he was afraid of losing the thing he loved. I've already lost, and I'm still here. A pause that was a period, not an invitation to argue. Fear of loss and love are not the same thing. Luke sat with this for a long time, after the visitor stood and moved back into the base. He spent the rest of the afternoon watching him. This was something Luke did with people who had something he needed to understand. He watched how they moved through the world when they were not being observed by anyone who expected anything from them. Obi-Wan had moved with intention and economy, every motion carrying long practice. Yoda moved with the grace of something that had long ago stopped needing to demonstrate it was paying attention. The visitor moved like someone who had decided that the place he was in and the people in it were worth knowing before anything else. He learned the name of every person in the base within 2 hours. Not in passing, not the quick acknowledgement of someone building political goodwill. He stopped. He faced each person and waited for the name to land before he moved on. He fixed a malfunctioning generator in the south corridor without being asked, which Luke knew about only because he happened to be walking past when it happened and heard the machinery settle back into its right sound behind him. He sat for 20 minutes with a mechanic whose language he did not know and whose language the mechanic did not know either. They sat in the maintenance bay with a schematic of the X-wing targeting system on the table between them, and they pointed and indicated and produced the expression, "That means I understand your meaning, though not." And by the end of it, something in the targeting array had been corrected, and both of them looked satisfied by the conversation, even though neither had understood most of what the other said. Luke thought the Force works through everyone differently. Or rather, the things the Force carried through one person had to travel through something else in another, and what mattered in the end was what you did with it, the direction you aimed it, the things you chose to protect. He was not sure if this thought confirmed what Obi-Wan had taught him, or quietly broke it. He suspected Obi-Wan would say the question itself was the answer, and that this was the thing about questions that mattered. They didn't resolve, they deepened. He would keep thinking about it. Later, when there was no longer time to think carefully about anything, he would still be thinking about it, and the thinking would have changed the shape of what he chose to do next. Across the base, the visitor was learning another name. He would learn all of them, he always did. The Emperor had read every report twice and understood the problem precisely. A being that could not be corrupted by power and could not be stopped by a weapon was not, properly speaking, a military problem. It was a philosophical one. All sufficiently powerful things had leverage points. The difference between beings who were manageable and beings who were not came down to what they were willing to lose. Find the thing they were unwilling to lose, apply pressure, and you did not need to destroy them. You needed only to make them choose. He had read the report from the desert world, he had read the sentence about the pilots, he had read the sentence about the names, he understood now. From the throne room on Coruscant, he issued one order. His voice was pleasant, avuncular, the voice of a man explaining a simple thing to people. He expected to understand it. 15 Star Destroyers to the Halaram system, where a rebel sympathizer population of 600 million occupied a temperate agricultural world. They were not to engage the rebel forces, they were to engage the surface. Not a military strike, a demonstration. He knew the being would come. That was the point. He wanted to see how fast it moved, what it chose when it could not choose everything, and whether a conscience, applied against sufficient scale, could be broken the way a muscle could be broken by being made to bear more than it was designed to carry. He already suspected the answer, but he was a patient man, and he preferred confirmation. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace in a tight formation above the atmosphere, 15 Star Destroyers arranged in a line that crossed the planet Terminator from pole to pole. At this altitude, the shadow of them fell on the surface below. Turbolasers warmed to targeting temperature. The lead gunnery officer transmitted the targeting solution to command for final authorization. He had been there before the first shot. He had heard the hyperspace exit through the deep harmonic of mass arrival, 17 mass shadows dropping into the system simultaneously, the signature of it passing through space at the speed of information itself. The rebel fleet's sensors had not caught it yet. He was already moving through the upper atmosphere, pulling altitude, and when the first turbolaser discharged, he was between its beam and the largest population center it had been aimed at. He stopped it. The energy of a Star Destroyer's turbolaser battery, aimed at a planetary surface from low orbit, was substantial. He held it, redirected it into the upper atmosphere, and moved. The next one. He was tracking all 15 ships simultaneously through the vacuum, reading their targeting solutions before the crews finished inputting them, and he was at near light speed between them, and it was still a 15-to-1 problem, which was a physics problem, not a question of power or will, and physics did not care about either of those things. He flew through the hull plating of the nearest destroyer on its port side, and came through the starboard, which told him something useful about Star Destroyer hull plating. It was not what Sun-Core survivable meant in practice. He took the ship's bow in both hands and pushed it off its targeting vector with the particular quality of effort that he had calibrated precisely for not destroying the vessel while disabling its fire. The crew inside was thrown to their stations. The ship spun slowly, fire suppressed by sheer positional displacement. He went to the next one. A direct turbolaser impact caught him in the chest while he was crossing between the 4th and 5th ships. He had been moving fast enough that his position was an estimate rather than a certainty, and the crew on the 4th ship had extrapolated well. The impact hit him with the specific force of a weapon designed to crack fortification plating from orbit, and it moved him backward through the vacuum for approximately 200 meters before he arrested the motion. Not stopped. He took 1 full second in the silent vacuum to assess the damage, found none that mattered, and continued. He grounded 6 Star Destroyers in the time it took the other 9 to adjust their formation. He guided each one's descent, controlled the tumble, verified through the hull that crew compartments were sealed before impact, and moved to the next before the first had finished its fall. The work was precise and exhausting in a way that had nothing to do with physical limitation and everything to do with the geometry of a 15-way problem with no solution that preserved all of the variables. The other 9 held their position and continued firing at secondary targets while he dealt with the first 6. He was moving faster than anything in this galaxy could move without hyperspace. He made calculations. He chose the most densely populated zones. He intercepted what he could intercept and redirected what he could redirect, and made the best decisions available in the time available. And the time available was not enough, and the mathematics of this was something he understood with great clarity and felt with great clarity simultaneously. By the time he circled back from the 6th grounding, a city sector was gone. He stood in the ash. The smoke rose around him in vertical columns in the still air. No wind. The quiet that follows after, which is a different quiet from silence, because silence is the absence of sound, and this was the presence of something that had been very loud, and was no longer there. He stood in it without moving. He did not collapse. He did not make the kind of sound that someone watching him might have identified as grief, because grief is a word for a thing that happens inside, and this had not gone inside yet. It was sitting on the outside of him, in the ash and the air and the spaces between what was still standing. A rebel soldier found him there. She had come carefully, at a distance that would have been respectful for someone she was less sure of, because word in the rebellion had moved quickly. He was approachable. He did not frighten easily. He should not be approached with fear. She began to say something about what he could and could not have done differently, the particular comfort that people offer in impossible situations, which is true and does not help. He stopped her, not unkindly. "Tell me their names," he said. "As many as you have." She had not expected this. She looked at him for a moment. Then she told him the ones she knew, which was not many, which was its own category of awful. The gap between the hundreds of thousands and the small number of names she had for them. He listened to everyone. At the system's edge, aboard his command vessel, Lord Vader had observed the engagement from sensor readout and direct visual confirmation, and had been taking notes in the only medium that mattered in such situations, which was his own assessment. He transmitted to the Emperor's private channel. "It has a limit, my master. It cannot be everywhere. 6 of the 15 ships are grounded crews alive, minimal hull damage. It moved at a speed my instruments could not reliably track. It took a direct turbolaser hit and continued. A pause. It does not retreat, and it does not break." The Emperor on Coruscant looked at his hands in his lap for a moment. When he responded, his voice was the patient, interested voice, the one that meant something had confirmed rather than surprised him. "Good," he said. "Then we know where to push." He already knew where. He had known since he read the first field report, the single notation from the rebel cell leader, the one sentence at the bottom of the sensor data. He checked on the pilots he grounded. He wanted to make sure they survived. A being that grieved 200 names stood in ash that contained 200,000. The instrument for that grief was not a weapon. It was a simple question of scale. How much loss could a conscience carry before the weight of what it could not prevent outweighed the will to keep trying? He intended to find out. The message came through a neutral courier, not Imperial channels. Not a rebel relay, a third-party carrier registered to no faction. The kind of intermediary used in this galaxy when 2 parties needed communication and both needed to be able to deny having wanted it. The message was brief and specified 3 things: a location, a time, and the fact that Lord Vader would come alone, without weapons drawn, and intended only to talk. The Rebellion's Council advised against it unanimously and with genuine urgency. The strategic arguments were good. Superman listened to all of them, and when they were finished, he looked across the table at Leia, who had been listening to the arguments with him and had not added one of her own. And she looked back at him with the expression of someone who has already seen the answer in the other person's face and has decided not to argue with it. "What do you expect to get from it?" she asked. He considered this honestly. An honest look at what's in there. She nodded once, the kind of nod that was not agreement, but acknowledgement, and the council meeting ended. The station had been derelict for long enough that the dust had settled into a permanent layer on the observation deck's viewport seals, and the stars beyond moved past slowly with the station's rotation. It was the kind of place that had once been built for a purpose and had outlasted it by a long time. And the particular silence of places that outlast their purpose had settled into the walls. Vader was already there when he arrived. He was standing at the far side of the observation deck with the stars behind him. The way he always stood in spaces he was assessing, upright, facing the room's entrance, the mechanical breathing, the only sound. This was either a gesture of good faith or a demonstration that he did not need anyone else, and it was probably both simultaneously. And he had said the same. They sat on opposite sides of the deck. The stars moved past the viewports in their slow arc. There was no reason to hurry anything here. Vader spoke first. His voice came through the synthesizer at a pace that was precisely measured, not rushed, not hesitant. "You cannot save them all. I know this. I spent years learning it. The Jedi teach you that care is strength. The Force teaches something different. You will reach the moment where the choice is impossible, and the only question that remains is how much you are willing to do." He said this not as a taunt and not as a recruitment. He said it the way someone says a thing that was true and cost them something to learn, and Superman heard it that way and understood, even as he heard it, that this was the version of the truth that Vader had organized around, the shape he had given the thing so it would fit in a life that had required him to do certain things. "You're speaking from experience," Superman said. "I am telling you what this galaxy teaches. You're telling me what it taught you." A difference, which he let sit without emphasizing it. Vader leaned forward by a fraction. The mechanical breathing remained steady. "Do you not have people you would do anything to protect? Would you not cross any line if it were the only way to keep them safe?" The questions were not rhetorical. Superman understood that. The questions had a particular quality, the quality of a diagnostic, a set of inputs designed to reveal a system's architecture, looking for the same crack in the same place that had been found before in someone else. He knew what a tempter sounded like. He had been in rooms with them. A tempter wearing a different armor, but running the same argument. He let the question sit the way it deserved to sit, without rushing to close it. "I would do a great deal to protect people I love," he said. "I wouldn't cross every line, and I know the ones I won't cross, because you believe in your own righteousness. Because I've seen what happens to people who tell themselves it's different when they're the ones doing it." He held Vader's visor. "It is never different, and they always tell themselves that at the beginning the breathing..." The slow rotation of stars. He had been listening for 20 minutes, and what he had assembled from the listening was not the picture of a tempter. It was the picture of a man who had built a structure of certainty around a wound and had been living inside that structure for so long that he had stopped being able to see it from the outside. He was not wrong that the impossible choice existed. He was using it to explain a different thing, a thing that had happened to him before he had the words he now used for it. "You're not telling me what happens to people who love too much," Superman said. You're telling me what happened to you, and you're calling it a lesson, so you don't have to call it a loss." The mechanical breathing continued. No other sound. "Is there anything left in there worth saving?" He asked it the way he asked every real question, with no performance attached to it, the way he might have assessed a building after a fire, looking for the structure still load-bearing under the damage. It was not a weapon. It was a genuine question, asked by someone who had learned that the genuine question was the only kind that reached anything. Vader did not answer, not because he had no answer. The absence of the answer was more specific than that. It was the silence of a man for whom the answer existed but could not be said aloud in front of an audience of any size, including one, because saying it aloud would require him to know what to do with it afterward, and he had not reached that part yet. He stood. The armor made the sound it always made, the specific sound of something functional and sealed. He turned toward the door. He did not threaten. He did not raise his hand. He simply went, and the shuttle's departure through the viewport was controlled and unhurried, the movement of a man who was leaving on his own terms, which was the only way he knew how to leave anything. Superman watched the exhaust fade against the stars. He did not know precisely what he had landed on. He knew he had landed on something, the way you know when you have said a true thing in a room where it had not been said before, not from a dramatic response, but from the specific quality of the silence that followed, the silence that meant the true thing was sitting with someone. Aboard the Devastator, in the sealed meditation chamber, Lord Vader sat. He did not reach into the Force for power. He sat with the Force, the way he had sat with it at the beginning, before the beginning, when he had been a different kind of person in a different kind of place, and the Force had felt like a gift rather than an instrument. He was not looking for anything in particular. He was sitting with a question he had not let himself ask in years. He did not know the answer yet. He did not transmit a report to the Emperor about the meeting on the derelict station. He would have normally. He transmitted everything of tactical relevance, and a meeting with the galaxy's most powerful unclassified being was by any measure tactically relevant. He did not transmit it. He sat in the sealed dark and breathed and did not think about why he had not sent the report, because thinking about it would require him to know what the absence meant, and he was not ready to know that yet either. The gap in the chain of command was small. One omitted report, one meeting that had not reached the Emperor's desk. It was the smallest possible thing. And it was the first time in a very long time that Lord Vader had kept something for himself. He told Leia before he launched. She did not try to stop him. She stood with her arms crossed, and her expression doing what her expression always did when she had already run the calculation and was now waiting for someone else to catch up, staying very still. "Why alone?" she said. "Because if I take the fleet, this becomes a battle. If I go alone, it becomes a conversation. Conversations end with fewer bodies." She looked at him for a moment. "You are either the bravest being I have ever met, or the most catastrophically optimistic." He considered this. Probably both. He looked out at the stars past the base's exterior. "I'll be fine, I know," she said. Which was not the same thing as saying she was not worried, and both of them understood the difference. He launched from the rebel base and climbed through the atmosphere at an angle that took him into deep space within 4 minutes. He was already at full charge from the system's star. He oriented toward the core and accelerated. Coruscant Prime was a blue-white main sequence star, hotter than Tatooine's twin suns, hotter than any yellow sun he had called home. He felt the difference the moment he crossed the inner system boundary, his cells responding to the higher spectral output, the way they always responded to better light. Every output running above its familiar ceiling. He was something above his standard maximum, heading toward the most fortified planet in the galaxy, under the star that made him most. He dropped from orbit through the Imperial City's atmosphere at speed, visible from 1,000 windows and tracked by every sensor in the city planet. TIE interceptors launched from 3 towers in the first 40 seconds. He did not evade them and did not engage them. He continued, and the interceptors, finding nothing they carried was relevant, peeled off. The Imperial Guard at the throne room tower had expensive armor and weapons designed for exactly this kind of intrusion, and none of it was adequate. He moved them, not harmed, set aside one by one with the care of someone who had a destination and no interest in damage on the way to it. He walked through the throne room doors. The Emperor had not risen from his chair. He was exactly as the reports described him, old and still and patient in his robes, in the chair that sat at the center of a room, designed to make everyone who entered it feel small. His voice, when he spoke, was warm. The voice of a scholar who has been waiting for a particular specimen to arrive, and finds that it has arrived on schedule. "Welcome," he said. "I have been curious about you." He had been expecting this. Superman could tell, the way you can tell in a room whether the surprise has been prepared. The Emperor had had weeks. He had prepared everything. The preparation was in the stillness, the specific quality of someone who has already run the possible outcomes and is not afraid of this one. "I know," Superman said. "That's why I came here." The Emperor's first offer was made simply and without drama, which was its own kind of pressure. "You are the strongest physical being in this galaxy. I am its ruler. Between us we could construct something that lasts 1,000 years. He was watching while he said it, watching for the place where the ambition lived. Superman declined, with the same simplicity. "I don't want to rule anything," the Emperor nodded. He had known this. He had already shifted to the second instrument before the first sentence was complete. "Your attachment is the problem," Sidious said. "You care about every life in this galaxy. So I will ensure that every life you try to protect costs 2 more. Your mercy is the Empire's most efficient recruitment tool. Every world you touch becomes a target. Every city you stand in front of becomes a demonstration." He laid it out with clinical patience, the map of exactly how Superman's presence would escalate reprisals against every population he moved to shield. It was not a bluff, it was a real calculation, and he had done the math. Superman had already done the math, too. He had done it standing in the ash of the bombarded planet, with a soldier's small list of names in his ears. He had made the decision there in that silence, that the math did not change the answer. "You're describing leverage," he said. "You think if you hurt enough people near me, I'll break. I've watched others try that before. It doesn't end well for the person trying it." The Emperor extended one hand. The life drain pulled bio-force energy backward through the force connection that every living cell maintained. It reached Superman and found nothing to pull, no force energy in the cells, no midi-chlorian interface to exploit. The technique encountered a biology that operated on entirely different principles and slid past without purchase. The Emperor's expression did not change in any dramatic way. It changed by a fraction in the eyes, the specific adjustment of a man who has encountered a new variable. "You are not of the Force," he said. There was something in his voice that was not quite surprise but was adjacent to it, the tone of a man updating a model. "You are merely strong. Apparently that's enough to have gotten here," Superman said. The avuncular voice continued, patient and certain. "Hope is the lie. You tell the weak to keep them obedient. The Force knows no hope. It knows strength. You have chosen to waste yours on beings who will die regardless of your choices." Superman was still for a moment. Then, "Where I come from, hope is not a delusion, it is a choice. I make it every day. It is enough, not because it wins every battle. I lost one 3 days ago and I will live with that. It is enough, because the alternative is becoming what you are. And I have no interest in that." "Sidious, then you will simply suffer more than most." "Yes, and I'll still be here tomorrow." The Emperor rose. Both hands came up, and the lightning that came from them was not the kind he used for interrogation. It was the full measure, the fleet-scale current, the kind that at the edge of known space had reached from a single figure and disabled an entire fleet of starships in one discharge. The throne room lights went out, the viewports cracked. The sound was not like any other sound. It hit Superman, and it did something real. He went to one knee only, left hand on the floor, the lightning covering him in a corona that lit the whole room, and the 3 seconds he stayed there were the 3 most honest seconds in the chapter, because they showed clearly what Darth Sidious was in this galaxy's hierarchy, and they showed clearly that the hierarchy of this galaxy had a ceiling. His Kryptonian cells, built for stellar radiation absorption at intensities that would unmake most matter, were encountering a different frequency at sufficient scale, and the adaptation was not seamless. This was visible. He rose. The cells adapted. Energy is energy, and a body that had survived the core of a sun was learning the local variant of a lesson it already knew. He absorbed the next 10 seconds of the discharge, and then he moved through it, through the room, and the Emperor's expression for the first time in this conversation carried something that was not calculation. He did not use heat vision. He did not use full strength. He dismantled the throne room methodically, choosing targets that removed function rather than erasing the room entirely. The communications arrays, the holographic relay network that carried the Emperor's voice across the galaxy, the command infrastructure, the chair. A dictator's throne is not the dictator. The throne projects permanence. Stories can be ended without anyone dying. He left Sidious standing in the rubble of his own seat of power. Alive, exposed, the lights out. "You don't understand why I'm not killing you," Superman said. Sidious stood in the dark of his dismantled room, and his voice when he answered was still level, still calculating, the voice of a man who had been outmatched before and had always found the longer angle. "Because you think mercy wins. It never has. It hasn't lost yet, either." He left the way he had come in, through the cracked viewports and the upper air of the Imperial City, into the blue-white light of the star above the galactic capital, climbing until the city planet was a curve below him, and then a disk, and then a point of reflected light, moving fast and unhurried into the dark. Behind him, in the wreckage, the most powerful man in the galaxy stood without his throne. The footage reached every corner of the galaxy within 6 hours. Rebel slicers had pulled it from the throne room's security archive before the Imperial response teams finished sealing the building, compressed it, routed it through 17 relay points, and fed it into every Rebel cell broadcast channel simultaneously. By the time the first Imperial Communications Office issued a suppression order, the recording had already been copied more times than the order could address. The suppression order itself became evidence that there was something worth suppressing, which was its own kind of message. Every Imperial commander in the galaxy watched the same thing. The Emperor's throne room, the throne demolished, and the communications arrays gone, and the holographic network dark, and the Emperor alive, standing in the wreckage of his seat of power in a room with no lights, which was somehow worse for the mythology of invulnerability, than if he had simply not appeared at all. Invulnerability is a story. Every functioning empire tells it about itself, because the story is load-bearing. A story with this footage attached to it was a story that now had to be told more carefully and louder and with less certainty, and those adjustments were visible to anyone who knew how to listen for them. The rebellion knew how to listen for them. Rebel cells across 40 systems moved within 12 hours of the footage's release. They had been waiting for a moment like this, not specifically this moment, but a moment of this category. Imperial command in disarray, the chain of communication disrupted at its top. The local garrisons waiting for authorization that was taking longer than usual to arrive, because the authorization process had been concentrated in a place that now had no operational communications relay. The cells did not wait for the authorization to sort itself out. They moved into the gap. Supply lines severed at junction points that Imperial logistics officers had marked as secure and had stopped double-checking because they had been secure for 3 years. Imperial garrisons on 6 worlds received simultaneous contact they had not anticipated and not been briefed to expect, because the briefing infrastructure had been damaged. Communication relays on 2 core adjacent worlds went dark in the same 4-hour window, cutting the sectors they served off from the central command net for long enough for the strikes within those sectors to land and withdraw before the response could organize. It was not a full offensive. The rebellion could not match the Empire ship for ship, and had not been able to for 20 years, and did not expect that to have changed in 6 hours. It was a coordinated pressure across a very large area applied at a very specific moment, which was the thing the rebellion had always been better at than the Empire gave them credit for, and the Empire was currently giving them credit for. He was with the rebel fleet, aboard a Mon Calamari cruiser, and he was not leading anything. This was a decision he had made before the fleet launched. Stated simply to Leia when she briefed him on the operations, he would follow her strategic direction, and he would operate within the framework she had built with her people. He was not the rebellion's general. He was not its weapon. He was available, and he was fast, and he could do things that changed the geometry of a given engagement, and those things were available to her strategy, not the other way around. What he did in practice was this. When Imperial pursuit fleets tracked rebel ships withdrawing from a completed strike, he was between the pursuit fleet and the rebel ships. When Imperial reinforcements dropped out of hyperspace to reinforce a garrison that was taking more contact than expected, he was there first. When a detention facility on a mid-rim world had held 43 rebel prisoners through 3 previous extraction attempts, because the walls had resisted everything the extraction teams could bring to bear. He went through the walls himself, and he brought the prisoners out, and he verified that the detention staff were accounted for and unharmed before he left. He grounded Star Destroyers the way he had learned to ground AT-AT walkers, methodically choosing the landing, verifying the crew compartments before impact, moving to the next before the last one had settled. He did not win the engagements alone. He made it possible for people who had been fighting this war for years to win the engagements those people could have won anyway if they'd had 1 more hour, 1 less pursuit vector to account for, 1 barrier removed from a plan that had been correct from the beginning. Leia watched him work from the bridge. She had been in command of operations in which the most powerful individual in the room decided that the operation was actually an opportunity for the most powerful individual in the room to show everyone what that looked like. She knew that dynamic from every angle, as the person who had been overruled, as the person who had been nominally in command while someone else made the actual decisions, as the person who had watched a winnable situation become a complicated one, because someone with more firepower than patience had decided strategy was optional. She had fought that dynamic for as long as she had been fighting the Empire, because they both produced the same result. The people who had built a thing over years got moved aside for the person who could do more damage in an hour. This was not that. He was following her plan, not interpreting it, not improving it without asking, not making the calls that the plan had designated to her people and then briefing her afterward. He was doing the thing she had told him the operation needed and checking back when the situation changed rather than deciding alone. She said nothing about it until the third engagement was finished and the fleet was holding its position in the quiet after. "You could be running this," she said. He was looking at the star field through the viewport. He did not look away. "Pah, no, I could be helping it. There's a difference." She had met a great many people who understood the difference in principle, and very few who understood it in practice well enough to live by it. She filed this under the category of things she had not expected and would not forget. By the end of the week, the count was this: 11 Star Destroyers grounded with their crews alive. 43 rebel prisoners extracted from a facility that had held them through every previous attempt. 6 Imperial supply chains broken at their most efficient junctions. 2 planetary garrisons that had been running force calculations all week and had concluded, separately, that continued resistance was a death sentence the chain of command had not prepared them for, and the paperwork would not survive. The rebellion had not had a week like this, since the Death Star had ceased to be an architectural feature of the Imperial arsenal. The Empire was not losing the war. The communications officer on the bridge reported it at 2200 hours. Imperial command was redistributing. New authorization protocols being established through secondary channels. Garrison commanders were receiving updated orders through routes that did not pass through Coruscant. The response was being organized. It was not fast by Imperial standards, but it was happening. Sidious was recalculating. This was not surprising. Sidious had never, in the decades of his operation, encountered a setback that he did not eventually convert into information. The throne room was information. The footage was information. The week of rebel gains was information. He was building a new model from all of it, and the model would eventually produce a new approach, and the approach would be more precisely targeted than the fleet bombardment, because he had now learned the shape of the thing he was targeting. Superman stood at the viewport and knew all of this, and was not surprised by any of it. He was not expecting the Empire to fall in a week. He had been in galaxies built like this one, where the weight of the institution was distributed across so many systems and so many moving parts that toppling the center only bought time for the rest to reorganize. He had never believed that one person, no matter what they could do, was the answer to a systemic problem of this size. He had believed, across a long career of showing up in bad places, that what one person could do was make the fight fairer, hold the line a little longer, give the people who were doing the real work one more opening. He intended to be here next week when the recalculation finished, and the week after that. Lord Vader was not meditating. There was a difference, and he was aware of it. In meditation, he reached into the Force and let it carry information back to him, the fleet around him, the currents of the galaxy, the hierarchy of power and threat and obligation. The Force spoke, and he listened, and the listening told him what to do. Thinking was older than that, and harder, and he had not done much of it in years. He stood at the observation deck viewport on the Devastator and watched the stars move in their long, slow arcs past the hull, and held a question at the distance you hold something you are not ready to put a name to. The question was not complicated. It had been put to him in plain language by a man from another galaxy in a derelict station above the outer rim, and it had not been rhetorical, and he had heard it clearly, and he had not answered. Is there anything left in there worth saving? The problem was not that the answer was no. He had lived for 20 years inside the certainty that the answer was no, and the certainty had been, if nothing else, stable. A man who has organized his life around a definite answer has a life that is organized. The problem was that he was no longer certain the answer was no, and a man who is no longer certain of the answer he has organized his life around does not have a different answer yet. He has a problem. He stood at the viewport and did not act on this. He did not know what to do with it. He held it at the distance of something not yet named, and watched the stars and breathed in the rhythm of the suit that was keeping him alive and said nothing. He had not sent the report. This, too, he held at a distance. On Dagobah, in the bog dark of the wetlands, Master Yoda sat, with his eyes closed and his ears very still. He had felt the changes in the Force over the last weeks, the way you feel a current change in deep water, not through the surface, but through the whole body at once, an adjustment in the pressure and direction of something moving at depth. The part of the living force that ran through the rebellion systems had changed in quality, not louder, not brighter, more certain, in the specific way of people who have been given one more reason to believe the fight is worth the cost. He turned this over. Something had served the light. The Force did not make it. Obi-Wan's ghost was present beside him, luminous and quiet, looking at the same darkness. "I don't know what he is," Obi-Wan said. "I know what he is not. He is not corrupted. He is not broken. He is not afraid." Yoda was quiet for a long moment. The Dagobah fog moved around them, slow and warm. "Neither Jedi nor Sith, this one," he said finally. "Something the Force did not make. And yet, serves the light. He does. Asks nothing of it." The bog filled the silence with its small sounds. "Worried I am," Yoda said. He did not elaborate immediately. He had a habit. Not of him, of the galaxy's fear of him. Fear the dark side's doorway. Wonder if the Empire's fear becomes its undoing, or his. Obi-Wan looked at him. Or both. Yoda opened his eyes. In the green dark of Dagobah, they caught no light from any visible source, and reflected it, anyway, the way eyes do when they have been looking at something for 900 years. "Both," he said. "Yes, both is the honest answer." He settled back into himself. Watch we must, interfere we cannot. Understand we may not, but learn we can. He closed his eyes again. The Force moved around, the absence it had been moving around for weeks, the shaped gap where a man from another universe stood in this galaxy without touching the living web. Yoda turned the strangeness of it over the way you turn a stone that water has smoothed into a shape you do not recognize, trying to find the right angle to understand it by. He did not find one. This, in its own way, was an answer. The corridor in the rebel base was empty at this hour. The way corridors are empty when most of the people who move through them have been doing difficult things for a long time and have finally agreed to sleep. He was standing at a viewport in the corridor's bend when Leia found him. She had the instinct which he had noticed in her from the beginning, for finding people who were somewhere difficult and not asking them to be somewhere easier. She came and stood beside him, with a particular quality of presence that meant she was there and not going anywhere and not requiring anything of the moment. After a while she asked, "What are you thinking about?" He did not pause. He said, and then this, and then the names I learned last week, and then home again. He watched the stars pass the viewport. I'm not sure in what order anymore. She stood next to him and did not say anything. He had carried the names since the ash. He carried them the way he had always carried things that could not be set down, not as a wound, but as a weight. There was a difference that mattered. A wound festered, it demanded attention, it changed the chemistry of every subsequent decision, it made a person act from the wound rather than from the person they had been before it. Weight was different. Weight just had to be held. You carried it, and you kept moving, and the moving was the point, and the weight was part of you now. But it was not the whole of you. He knew the names he had been given. He would keep knowing them. They were the price of the weak, and the price had been real, and carrying it clearly was the only honest response to it. Leia stood with him until the stars felt like a thing you could look at again rather than a thing you had to look through. That was, he understood, exactly the right thing to do. In his quarters at the rebel base, Luke Skywalker was holding his lightsaber hilt, not using it, not igniting it. Holding it the way you hold something that contains a question you have not resolved, turning it in his hands in the low light of the room. He had been thinking about the conversation. He had been thinking about it since it happened, and he was still thinking about it now, which meant he had not finished thinking about it, which was either the sign that it was a very complex question, or the sign that some questions were not the kind you finished. He had been told by teachers he trusted completely that love was the crack, that the strongest Jedi who had ever lived had fallen because of it, that the path was letting go, releasing what you could not control, trusting the Force with the people you loved, rather than trying to secure them against loss through your own power. He had met a being for whom that was apparently not true, a being whose strength came from love and had not been corrupted by it, a being who had lost everything once and stood up anyway. He did not know what to do with this. He put the hilt down. He picked it up again. Some things took longer to resolve than one conversation. Some things took a lifetime. The Jedi tradition had 900 years of practice behind it, and Yoda was still thinking, still uncertain, still finding the edges of things he had assumed were settled. Luke was 22 years old, and he had a lightsaber and a question and a long road. He put the hilt down and left it there and went to sleep. In the morning, the question would still be there, the way the important ones always were. He was starting to think that was not a problem. He was starting to think that was just what it meant to be someone who took the question seriously. The Empire was not defeated. This was the honest accounting of where things stood. Darth Sidious was alive, sitting in a rebuilt command center on Coruscant, in a room that was smaller than the throne room and temporary in its configuration and adequate for the work. He had been here before. Not this specific room, but this specific condition. The condition of a man who has suffered a setback and is now without any particular urgency, thinking his way around it. He had waited decades before. He was good at waiting. He had a word he kept returning to, the way you return to a word that has always served you, and the word was patience. The rebellion was stronger than it had been 4 weeks ago. It was not victorious. The war continued on 40 fronts, across a galaxy that had been organized around imperial rule for 20 years, and systems built to that scale did not fall in a week or a month, or because one person had walked into the throne room and dismantled a chair. The rebellion knew this. They had always known this. They had been fighting the long version of this war since before most of the people now fighting it had joined. Superman knew this too. He had never been in a world simple enough to have a single victory that ended everything. He found Leia at the strategic table after the briefing had cleared, the room quiet around her, the star maps still active on the display surface. She had the look she got when she was running through the next problem set, before the current one had fully resolved, which was most of the time. He sat across from her and waited until she looked up. "I'll be here," he said. As long as I'm here, I'll help, but the moment this becomes your galaxy, following me instead of fighting for itself, I need you to tell me." He held her gaze. "The rebellion was here before I was. It needs to be here after." She looked at him for a moment. The particular quality of her attention, when she was taking something seriously, was unmistakable. It was the full version, not the quick assessment. "I already know the difference," she said. "We've had leaders who made things about themselves. It looks nothing like this." A pause. "I'll tell you." He nodded. That was enough. The base's outer wall faced west, and the system's star was low on that side, and he stood outside in the open air with the light on his face, and felt his cells absorbing it with the quiet efficiency they had always had, converting what the star offered into what he needed, unhurried and automatic as breathing. The ghost appeared beside him without announcement, luminous blue in the early evening, carrying the quality of peace he had carried in life, when he had stopped being afraid of the next thing. "You asked nothing of the Force," Obi-Wan said. "Win. In all of this you made no use of it, and asked for none. Curious thing to observe. Does it have anything to give me?" Obi-Wan considered this with the care he brought to questions that deserved it. "I don't think you're the kind of being it gives to," he said. "I think you may be the kind it receives." The light moved in the ghost's face in a way that was not wind. Superman looked at him for a moment. "May the Force be with you," he said. Obi-Wan's expression settled into something that was, in the luminous face, the closest available version of warmth. "And with you," he said. "Whatever it is you have instead." The ghost faded in the low light, slowly, the way last things go when they go gently. The air where he had been was ordinary air. Superman looked up at the stars for a long moment, then he rose. He climbed through the atmosphere and out the other side of it, into the dark and cold of open space, and the system's star found him there, not the blue-white charge of Coruscant Prime, but enough, the particular enough that had always been sufficient for the work he did. His cells absorbed the light. He oriented toward the nearest signal of need, and accelerated. Below him the rebel base grew small, the planet a curve, the star system a collection of moving points. Above him the stars opened in every direction, a number that had no useful name. He was one figure in it, and he was not going home because he did not know yet if he could, and the uncertainty about that was something he carried at the same weight he had always carried it, without it changing the direction he was moving. He was going toward the next problem, which was where he had always been going. In the rebuilt chamber on Coruscant, far away from any star he could feel, the Emperor sat. The room was temporary. He had lived in temporary rooms before. He was not bothered by them. He was bothered by very few things, in the way that a man is bothered by few things when he has decided that the only thing that matters is the outcome, and the outcome is still reachable. The being from another galaxy had a weakness. Every being did. He had not found it yet. He would look until he found it, and he would find it, because he had not yet encountered a thing that did not have a price. If you were patient enough to find the currency it accepted, he was very patient. And further still, beyond the mapped edges of the galaxy, in a silence that the Force did not fully reach and had, perhaps, never reached, something registered the change, not the Force. Something that had been present before the Force was named, in the time before this galaxy's particular story began, which was a long time by any count that applied to the beings moving inside it, and not a long time by the count that applied to whatever sat at this distance. It registered the presence of a being who carried a different kind of energy entirely. Stellar, cellular, ancient, in its own way and wrong in the specific way of something that had come from outside the parameters of this universe's physics. It found this interesting. It did not move. Not yet. It simply noted the presence and continued watching the way things watch when they have no particular urgency, and all the time that exists. The space beyond the galaxy's edge was simply aware, farther in, smaller against the star field than a dust mote against a window. A point of light was moving through the mapped regions of the galaxy, getting smaller as the distance increased, not stopping, not because of a prophecy written before he was born, not because the Force had chosen him for a destiny in a tradition that had no category for what he was. He had chosen it the day he had first understood what he was and what that meant in relation to the world around him, and he had kept choosing it every day since, across every universe he had ever stood in, and he was choosing it now, accelerating through a galaxy that had not made him, going toward whoever needed him next. That, in the end, was all hope ever was. Not a force of nature, not a prophecy, a choice. Made again and again by beings who had every reason not to, until the choosing became something that looked, from the outside, like a kind of gravity. He did not stop. Okay, now that we've watched the most powerful man in any universe walk into the Emperor's throne room and tell the ruler of the galaxy to go sit in the dark, your turn. Who is the next character you are dying to see go absolutely feral in a universe that has no business surviving them? Drop the name in the comments and tell me where in the world you are watching from. If you want more crossovers like this, drop a like and hit subscribe.